Anticipated. They were nothing like the primitive ships the Zerk had encountered before. They were agile, adaptive, and entirely unpredictable. These ships, Vrothak murmured, his eyes widening. This isn't conventional. This is something else. The human fleet, though outnumbered and technologically inferior, moved with an unexpected grace and coordination. It was as if the fleet's commanders could predict every move the Zerk made before they made it. The ships darted through space with precision, striking at the Zerk fleet's weak points, attacking from unpredictable angles, and retreating before the Zerk could retaliate. Vrothak's frustration grew with every passing moment. The Zerk were used to dominance. They relied on their overwhelming firepower, on their advanced technology, and their ability to outfight any enemy. But now they were being outsmarted by a species they had written off as primitive. Every time a Zerk vessel tried to retaliate, a human ship was already gone, reappearing elsewhere to land another strike. "This is impossible," Sarah muttered, watching the chaos unfold on the screens. "They're not fighting with weapons alone. It's like they're reading us. Every move we make, they know what we'll do next." Vrothak clenched his fists in frustration. It's not just the game. It's something deeper. They've found a way to evolve their minds, to think faster than we can predict. Their adaptability is their weapon. We've underestimated them. As the human fleet continued its relentless assault, Vrothak's mind raced. The humans were doing exactly what he had feared, using intelligence as their primary weapon. They weren't fighting a conventional war. They were engaging in a battle of wits, using their creativity to stay one step ahead of the Zerk at every turn. And with every strike, they were slowly chipping away at the Zerk's confidence, at their sense of superiority. But the Zerk were not without their own advantages. The fleet, though caught off guard, was still far more powerful than anything humanity had in terms of sheer firepower. Vrothak's strategy was to regroup, to reorganize the fleet, and crush the human ships with overwhelming force. It was only a matter of time before their clever tactics ran out of steam. Or so he thought. As he prepared to issue new orders, something caught his eye on the screen. A single human ship, out of nowhere, had slipped through the Zerk defense lines. It was small, barely noticeable, except for the fact that it had planted itself directly in the path of Vrothak's flagship. The ship was a direct challenge, a beacon of defiance. "Do they really believe they can stop us with this?" Vrothak said, disbelief creeping into his voice. But as he looked closer, he saw something that froze him in his tracks. The ship wasn't alone. A large number of human vessels had suddenly reappeared from different directions, all converging on the Zerk fleet. The human ships, though smaller, were coordinated. They weren't just attacking randomly. They were encircling the Zerk fleet, creating a net, tightening their hold with each passing second. The realization hit Vrothak like a lightning bolt. The humans had lured them into a trap. With horrifying clarity, he understood that the Zerk fleet was caught in a web of their own making. The human ships, using their knowledge of tactics, had turned the tables. They had anticipated the Zerk's move and had set a trap that was now closing around them. The first wave of human attacks struck with brutal efficiency, hitting weak spots in the Zerk fleet's formation. But it wasn't just the firepower that was devastating. It was the speed, the precision, the unpredictability of the human tactics. Each strike was followed by another, each more calculated than the last. This is not how it's supposed to go," Vrothak muttered under his breath, feeling the weight of his mistakes. The Zerk were losing, not because of technology, but because they had underestimated the human mind. The one weapon the Zerk had no way of predicting. The battle for Earth was far from over, but it was clear now. Humanity was not just defending its home. They were rewriting the rules of warfare, and the Zerk were learning the hard way that intelligence, adaptability, and strategy were far more powerful than they had ever realized. The Zerk Dominion had arrived at the edge of the solar system, and Admiral Vrothak's gaze pierced through the viewfinder of his command chair as he surveyed the blue-green planet below. For the last few weeks, his fleet had been preparing for the final phase of their mission. Earth, a primitive world filled with unrefined technology and disorganized defenses, had never posed a threat to the Zerk before. Vrothak had led countless campaigns against civilizations far more advanced than Earth, but this time, something was different. He couldn't quite shake the uneasy feeling that clung to him like a shadow. His fleet, a vast armada of gleaming warships and advanced drones, stretched across space, ready to launch. As the Admiral reviewed the final reports, his second-in-command, a sharp-eyed lieutenant named Sara, approached him with the latest intelligence data. "The human defenses are pathetic, sir," Sara reported, her voice steady but tinged with an underlying excitement. "Their military is fragmented, and their technology is centuries behind us. The planetary defense network is a joke. We should be able to neutralize them without any difficulty." Vrothak didn't respond immediately. His fingers tapped thoughtfully on the console in front of him. He'd read the reports, and he knew the odds. But something still gnawed at him, a feeling that wasn't easily explained by logic or strategy. He had fought and won countless battles, but something about this mission felt different. Earth, despite its technological backwardness, seemed to have something unexpected about it. "Have the scouts report back on the human settlements," he ordered after a moment of silence. He needed more data, something that would either confirm or alleviate the unease in his chest. Sara nodded, and moments later, the scout drones sent back their findings. They had been watching the Earth for weeks, and they had found nothing of particular interest, until now. One of the scouts, while monitoring human behavior, had picked up an unusual signal coming from a suburban neighborhood. At first glance, it appeared to be nothing more than the typical activity of the planet's inhabitants: traffic, noise, children playing in the streets. But something in the signal stood out, a pattern. One human child, Timothy Adams, had been playing a Starship Simulator game, and his patterns of play were nothing like the random chaos the scouts had anticipated from such a primitive species. "Admiral, you need to see this," Sara said, her voice suddenly sharper. She brought up the footage on the main view screen. On it, a young boy sat in a small room, his eyes glued to the glowing screen of a game. His hands moved swiftly over the controls, seemingly in a trance as he navigated the digital world with startling precision. A Starship Simulator, designed as entertainment, was the focus of his attention. Vrothak's eyebrows furrowed as he observed the child's movements. The game was simple, by their standards, but the boy's gameplay wasn't. The way he maneuvered his virtual ship, the decisions he made in moments of simulated combat, everything felt deliberate. Vrothak could recognize the marks of a tactician in the child's movements, something he had seen in the commanders of other civilizations. It was as if the child was naturally instinctive in battle, moving in ways that were far too coordinated for someone of his age. For a moment, Vrothak almost felt an odd sense of respect for the child's abilities. "What is this?" he muttered to himself, more to his own thoughts than anyone else. Sara stood silently beside him, waiting for the Admiral's orders. The implications of this were clear, but they weren't immediately obvious to her. To her, this was just another human child playing a game. But to Vrothak, it felt like the beginning of something far more dangerous. If this child's play could be so sophisticated, what other potential did humanity have? And perhaps more troubling, could this child's tactics prove to be the key to their survival? Vrothak turned away from the screen, his mind racing. He needed more information. This mission, this invasion, was no longer as straightforward as he had originally thought. Earth's fate, perhaps even the Zerks, might rest on the shoulders of a child playing a game. "Monitor the boy," he ordered. "We need to know everything about him. And get me a full analysis of that game." Now, Timothy Adams, oblivious to the alien eyes watching him, continued his game in the comfort of his small bedroom. The sunlight filtered through the curtains, casting a warm glow over the room, but Timothy didn't notice. His focus was entirely on the glowing screen in front of him, where a starship simulator flickered to life with each press of a button. The game was a simple one, a basic simulation of space combat, where players could control digital starships and engage in simulated battles. It wasn't particularly advanced by most standards. There were no hyper-realistic graphics or complex artificial intelligence, just a series of straightforward levels. But for Timothy, it was everything. The thrill of navigating through asteroid fields, evading enemy fire, and outsmarting opponents kept him engaged for hours at a time. It was a way to escape, to be in control of something larger than himself. As he sat there, his hands flying over the joystick and buttons, Timothy's mind was completely immersed in the digital universe. The familiar hum of the game's interface surrounded him, but in the back of his mind, he could hear the soft hum of the air conditioning, the distant sound of traffic outside, and the occasional voice of his younger sister from down the hall. It all seemed distant, as if those things belonged to another world, a world he could leave behind the moment he started a new game. Timothy's movements were swift and confident. His ship darted between incoming laser blasts, narrowly dodging enemy fire. He wasn't just playing the game. He was commanding the ship, leading it with the precision of someone far older. Each decision, each command was calculated, as though he had been through this simulation hundreds of times before. But Timothy wasn't experienced in any real form of space combat. He was just a child, spending his free time playing a game. And yet, his gameplay was becoming something that would catch even the most seasoned strategist off guard. Every move he made in the game felt almost like an instinct. His digital ship's evasive maneuvers mirrored tactics that were used in real-world military operations, tactics that had taken years of training to master. It was as if Timothy had been born with an uncanny ability to understand the dynamics of warfare. Meanwhile, aboard the Zerk fleet, Admiral Vrothak and his officers were studying the footage with growing intrigue. The more they observed, the more the situation grew baffling. The game was far too simplistic to be anything other than a basic entertainment device, yet Timothy's handling of it was nothing short of extraordinary. The child's movements were so precise, so deliberate, that it couldn't simply be chalked up to luck. Vrothak stood at the front of his command center, hands clasped behind his back, as he scrutinized the data that was now pouring in. "This is impossible," he muttered under his breath. "A human child cannot possess these skills without extensive training." Zara, standing next to him, was still processing the information. She had seen tactical geniuses before, but never from someone so young, let alone from a species that was supposed to be at such an early stage of technological development. "It's unsettling, Admiral," she said quietly. "This child is playing the game, and yet he's acting with the tactics of a seasoned commander." The Zerk fleet's AI had already begun to analyze the game's algorithms and patterns. The results were more confusing than expected. The simulator itself wasn't sophisticated enough to teach such advanced strategies. No human race, at least in the eyes of the Zerk, should have been able to produce someone capable of making such intelligent decisions, and yet Timothy did so effortlessly. A new report from the scout drones came in. This time, it included an unsettling fact. Timothy wasn't just playing for entertainment. His gameplay was becoming more and more advanced. He was consistently outmaneuvering the game's built-in challenges, something that would take a human commander years of training and battlefield experience to replicate. The simulation was supposedly limited, but the child's strategies kept evolving. Vrothak's mind raced. Was this simply a freak anomaly? Or could this be the tip of an iceberg? The thought gnawed at him. If a child could grasp such complex tactics, what did that mean for humanity's ability to defend itself against the Zerk? Had the humans unknowingly developed something dangerous, something more powerful than they realized? "Prepare a full analysis of this game," Vrothak ordered. "I want every piece of data we can get. There's something here, something we are missing." Zara hesitated before speaking again. Admiral, do you think the boy could have been trained by someone else? A secret organization, perhaps? It's possible, but this is still just a game. Vrothak was silent for a moment. He had his doubts, but the evidence was right in front of him. Something about this child, this game, felt like a warning. No, this is different. The human race is more unpredictable than we thought. As the Zerk fleet continued its silent watch, Vrothak couldn't help but wonder, had humanity unknowingly uncovered a new way of thinking, a way of war that would change everything? The game was just a game, but to Vrothak, it felt like so much more. The hours dragged on as Vrothak continued to observe Timothy's gameplay, each minute feeling heavier than the last. He could no longer dismiss the child's skills as a simple fluke. Every time Timothy engaged in the simulation, his actions became more deliberate, his maneuvers more calculated. Vrothak felt something shifting inside him, a sense of unease building with each passing moment. The game was supposed to be a distraction, a trivial pastime for a human child, but it was rapidly becoming something else, something much more dangerous. The Zerk Admiral's mind raced as he replayed the footage. Timothy's strategies were so instinctual, so natural, that it was impossible to believe they were the result of luck or coincidence. Every time the child was faced with a new challenge, his responses were flawless. He predicted enemy movements before they happened, calculated the best defensive maneuvers under pressure, and struck with precision. It was as if the boy had been trained in the art of warfare from birth, yet there was no record of such training. Earth's military forces were barely able to defend their own planet from minor threats, let alone the might of the Zerk. Vrothak stood in front of the vast, holographic display in his command center, watching the simulation unfold once again. Timothy's virtual ship darted and weaved between a barrage of enemy fire. In one swift movement, the child ordered his ship to retreat, luring the enemy into a trap. The Zerk Admiral's heart skipped a beat. The strategy was so effective, so precise, that it mirrored tactics Vrothak himself had used in battles against other advanced civilizations. He had seen these same maneuvers used by the highest-ranking commanders in the Zerk Dominion, creators of strategy, masters of war. How could this be? Vrothak whispered to himself, more confused than ever. This child has no formal training, no experience, yet he commands with the skill of a veteran strategist. Zara, standing beside him, watched the footage with a mix of skepticism and intrigue. Admiral, this is impossible. He's a child, a human child. There's no way he could understand these tactics unless... She trailed off, hesitant to finish the thought. Unless he's been taught, Vrothak finished for her, his voice low. But that didn't make sense either. If the humans had such advanced military training, it would have been noted. Their techniques, their strategic brilliance, would be documented, especially if they had trained someone so young. But Timothy's skills didn't align with anything the Zerk had seen. There was no evidence of covert training programs, no hidden military agendas. The boy wasn't just playing a game. He was demonstrating the kind of tactical genius that could turn the tide of a battle. And that meant something bigger was at play. If humans had the ability to think like this, to respond to challenges with such ingenuity, then the invasion that Vrothak had planned might not be so easy after all. The more Vrothak watched, the more it became clear this was not just a game. The child was learning at an exponential rate, developing new strategies with every encounter. The Zerk Admiral couldn't ignore the possibility that the child's rapid mastery over the game was not a random occurrence, but a sign of something more. It was as if the game itself was evolving, adapting to Timothy's decisions, helping him become a better strategist with every move. This cannot be a coincidence, Vrothak muttered. The game is somehow facilitating his growth, enhancing his abilities. But how? And why? Zara's mind was racing. The implications of this were staggering. If this child could develop such advanced tactical thinking by playing a simple game, could the entire human race be capable of the same? Could humanity, in its primitive state, possessed the cognitive potential to outthink even the Zerk. She shivered at the thought. The thought was unsettling, but it was becoming harder to dismiss. Vrothak knew the Zerk had always prided themselves on their intellect, their ability to strategize and predict the behavior of their enemies. They had conquered countless worlds through sheer brilliance and technological superiority. But this child, this one human boy, was challenging that belief. The more Vrothak thought about it, the more he realized that the Zerk might have underestimated Earth's potential. They were facing an enemy unlike any they had encountered before. Vrothak clenched his fists, his eyes narrowing in determination. We cannot underestimate these humans. If they can produce a child with this kind of strategic genius, what does that say about their future? Zara hesitated before speaking. Admiral, what if this child is only the beginning? What if humanity's entire approach to combat is evolving in a way we don't understand? The question hung in the air, and Vrothak knew that the answers were far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. What had once seemed like a simple conquest now felt like a battle against an unpredictable force. And it was all thanks to a child playing a starship simulator. Get me more information on this game, Vrothak ordered, his voice cold. I want to know everything about it. And watch the boy. We need to understand how far this goes. The invasion was no longer just about military might. It was about something much deeper. The Zerk were facing an intelligence they had never anticipated, and they were losing their grip on the certainty they had once held so proudly. Vrothak stood motionless, eyes locked on the holographic display as Timothy's virtual ship once again danced through a simulated battlefield with precision that was almost unnatural. It was as if the child had become one with the game, his movements so fluid and instinctual that they defied belief. The tactics he employed, while seemingly basic to anyone who had studied warfare, were executed with such mastery that they seemed new, innovative, even. It wasn't just the boy's ability to react in the moment. It was his capacity to anticipate, to think several steps ahead, that stood out. Every time Timothy faced a new challenge in the game, he adapted. He didn't just respond to the enemy's moves. He predicted them. And then he outwitted them. Vrothak's mind raced as he tried to wrap his thoughts around what he was seeing. It was clear now that the child wasn't simply playing for enjoyment. Timothy was learning. With every level, his tactics grew sharper, more refined, as though the game itself was teaching him the art of war. But that didn't make sense. How could a primitive human game possess such depth? How could this boy be evolving at such an extraordinary rate, simply by interacting with the simulation? The more Vrothak watched, the more he realized the answer was both terrifying and fascinating. Humanity, in all its apparent simplicity, might possess something the Zerk had never anticipated: ingenuity. They weren't just relying on brute force or advanced technology. The humans were thinking, evolving. And, in a way, they were doing it faster than anyone had expected. This isn't just a game, Vrothak said quietly to Xara, who stood beside him. Her gaze never left the screen, her own thoughts mirroring his growing concern. Xara nodded. The way the child plays, his choices, his strategies, it's more than just luck or random decision-making. He's learning, Admiral. He's adapting to the simulation as if he's been trained in advanced military strategy. The game is responding to him, almost as if it's designed to challenge him. But how? Vrothak's brow furrowed, a realization beginning to form in his mind. The game isn't just testing him. It's teaching him. But who would design such a thing for a human child? Zara's voice was hesitant, but laced with an unsettling truth. Maybe someone did. Maybe this game was designed as more than just entertainment. Maybe it was meant to train future commanders, future strategists, without them even knowing it. The thought struck Vrothak like a lightning bolt. What if this game was part of a larger plan? What if humanity had figured out how to cultivate tactical minds through something as simple as play? The Zerk had always seen themselves as the pinnacle of intellect and strategy, but now it was possible that a race of humans, less advanced technologically, but more creative than they had ever imagined, was on the verge of discovering a new kind of warfare. A warfare that didn't rely on overwhelming firepower, but on cunning, intelligence, and adaptability. "This changes everything," Vrafek muttered, running a hand through his blackened hair. The implications were staggering. If humanity could harness their creativity in such a way, they could learn to fight back with more than just conventional weapons. They could adapt, adjust, and ultimately survive, perhaps even defeat the Zerk. Timothy's ship on the screen made another flawless escape from an incoming attack, this time executing a maneuver that Vrafek had used only a handful of times in his most difficult battles. The child, without even realizing it, was mimicking one of the Zerk's most effective evasive strategies. Vrafek watched as the virtual ship slid into a narrow gap in an asteroid field, evading enemy missiles by milliseconds. It was a perfect execution of a strategy he'd spent years perfecting, and here it was, being executed by a human child with no formal training. Sarah spoke again, her voice quieter now. "Do you think the human race is more capable than we thought, Admiral?" Vrafek turned his gaze toward her, his expression hardening. "I think we've underestimated them for too long. This child, this game, it's not just a fluke. It's a warning. Humanity is not just fighting to survive. They are learning, evolving in ways we can't predict." The realization sent a chill through Vrafek's spine. In all his years of commanding fleets, of conquering worlds, he had never encountered an enemy like this. The Zerk had always relied on overwhelming force, on the power of their technology, their superiority in weapons and ships. But this was something new, something organic. Humans weren't just relying on what they had. They were learning to outthink their enemies. And if they could do that, then no amount of firepower would guarantee victory. "We can't ignore this any longer," Vrafek said firmly, his voice filled with a new sense of urgency. "Prepare the fleet. I want a full analysis of every human military installation on the planet. We're not just facing a weak, disorganized species. We're facing a species that might be capable of learning faster than we ever imagined. And that could be more dangerous than any weapon we have." Zara's eyes widened slightly as she absorbed the Admiral's words. "We need to be careful, Admiral. If humanity is evolving this quickly, we might be facing something far more unpredictable than we thought." Vrafek nodded. "Exactly. This isn't just an invasion anymore. It's a race to see who can outthink the other. And right now, we don't know who's winning." As the Zerk fleet prepared for the next stage of their operation, Vrafek couldn't help but wonder if the true battle was only just beginning. The galaxy had never seen a species quite like humanity, and perhaps for the first time, the Zerk were about to meet an enemy they couldn't predict. As the Zerk fleet stood poised at the edge of the solar system, Earth's response remained a mystery. Despite the Admiral's growing unease, the humans had yet to make any notable move in defense. Their military, as it had been observed, was disjointed and uncoordinated, still relying on old technologies and outdated strategies. But beneath the surface of this apparent vulnerability, Vrafek had begun to suspect there was something more at play. A deeper level of potential, one that could not be ignored. On Earth, Timothy Adams was completely unaware of the warships that loomed in space above his planet. His life remained centered on the little Starship simulator game, a simple escape from the struggles of school and family life. Yet, as he continued to play, his progress had reached a level that even he found surprising. The strategies he once found difficult were now second nature. He was no longer simply winning. He was outmaneuvering the game's built-in AI with ease, as if the system itself were bending to his will. That afternoon, Timothy sat in his bedroom, as usual, playing the game. His hands worked swiftly, his eyes focused. But this time, something was different. As he reached the highest level of the simulation, a new challenge appeared on the screen. It was an enemy force far more advanced than anything he had seen before, its ships moving with a calculated, deliberate aggression. The AI, which had always been predictable in its responses, now seemed to be learning from Timothy's every move, adapting just as he had. Timothy paused, the feeling of familiarity creeping up on him. The patterns of movement, the evasive maneuvers, everything about the new enemy felt real. For a moment, he wondered if this was some sort of test. The thought quickly passed as he returned to his game, his instincts kicking in. He felt a rush of excitement as he began plotting his next move. He had no idea that his actions were being observed, recorded, analyzed by forces beyond his comprehension. Back in the Zerk Command Center, Admiral Vrothak studied Timothy's latest gameplay with growing concern. The boy had once again exceeded expectations. His strategies, his ability to predict the movements of an enemy that seemed to adapt as quickly as he did, were beyond what should have been possible. As Timothy's ship dodged a devastating barrage of fire and launched a counterattack, Vrothak's eyes narrowed. "This is no longer just a game," he muttered. "The boy, he's anticipating our moves, predicting what we'll do before we even act." Sarah stood beside him, a look of disbelief on her face. "Admiral, are you suggesting that this child has somehow recognized us? That he knows our fleet's tactics? It's impossible." Vrothak's mind raced. It didn't make sense. How could Timothy be mimicking the exact tactics used by the Zerk in their own operations? There was no logical explanation. The child hadn't been trained in the art of war. Yet here he was, executing maneuvers that mirrored the Zerk's advanced strategies, ones that even the most experienced commanders would struggle to replicate. "We need to confirm this," Vrothak said, his voice filled with a newfound urgency. "There must be more to this game than we realize. We need to know who designed it, why it's so advanced, and if there's any connection to our operations. It's no longer just about Earth's defenses. This child, this boy, could be more dangerous than any fleet of ships we've ever faced." Zara didn't speak right away, but the thought was clear in her mind. If humanity was producing minds like Timothy's, the Zerk might be dealing with an enemy far beyond what they had ever anticipated. And the boy was not alone. What if, like Timothy, other humans were capable of similar feats? What if the entire human race had access to a new form of intelligence, one that made their outdated technology irrelevant in the face of new strategies? Vrothak's fingers tapped rhythmically on the console, his mind running through 1,000 scenarios. The Zerk had always dominated with superior firepower, with the advantage of their technology. But what if the key to defeating them didn't lie in brute force? What if it lay in intelligence? What if the key to humanity's strength was their ability to adapt, to think in ways that even the most advanced species had not predicted? The Zerk had always believed they were the smartest, the most advanced. But now, Vrothak couldn't help but wonder, was their time coming to an end? Were they about to face a species capable of defeating them, not with superior weapons, but with superior tactics? "We must learn everything we can about these humans," Vrothak said, his voice tinged with both admiration and concern. "Their ability to think, to adapt. If it's truly as advanced as this child's gameplay suggests, it could be a game changer. We need to understand this before it's too late." Sarah nodded. "I'll begin the analysis immediately, Admiral." But deep down, both of them knew that the situation had already begun to spiral out of their control. Earth, in all its apparent simplicity, was showing a potential the Zerk had never considered. And now, with the human response looming on the horizon, the real battle was just beginning. As Vrothak's command center buzzed with activity, his thoughts were consumed by a single persistent question. How had humanity developed such an advanced capacity for strategy so quickly? The child's gameplay had only confirmed what he feared. Humanity had something the Zerk had not anticipated. It wasn't just about weapons or technology. It was about something far deeper. The ability to adapt, to learn, to evolve. Meanwhile, on Earth, something was happening beneath the surface that the Zerk hadn't noticed. The world's governments were on the verge of realizing the true gravity of their situation. Although the invasion had not officially begun, Secret meetings were already underway. The world's military leaders, scientists, and strategists were starting to piece together the puzzle. They weren't just facing an enemy that had the superior weapons or firepower. They were facing an intelligence that had already anticipated their every move. Timothy, still unaware of the growing threat in space, continued to play his simulator. Each time he faced a new challenge, he adapted, and the game seemed to evolve with him. It was no longer just a tool for entertainment. It had become a teacher, a mentor of sorts, guiding him through battles that required ingenuity, creativity, and tactical brilliance. Timothy wasn't just playing the game. He was learning how to think like a commander. He had no way of knowing that his skills were about to be tested in a way he could never have imagined. In an underground facility, far from the public eye, a coalition of scientists, engineers, and military personnel worked feverishly to understand the forces threatening Earth. They were analyzing every piece of information, every potential clue, in hopes of discovering a way to fight back against the impending Zerk invasion. Among them was Dr. Emily Parker, a cognitive scientist who had been investigating human learning and adaptability for years. It was her expertise that led the team to one startling conclusion. The game that Timothy had been playing was more than just a simulation. It was a covert training program. Dr. Parker paced the lab, her mind racing. The game, though publicly marketed as a simple form of entertainment, contained advanced algorithms designed to teach and enhance cognitive processes in ways that were difficult to detect. "It's not just about strategy," she muttered to herself. "It's about evolution." The game adapts to the player. It evolves alongside them, honing their abilities to think critically, to problem solve, to anticipate outcomes. It's like a living entity. Her team worked tirelessly to uncover the game's origins, but there were no clear answers. All they knew was that it wasn't a product of any known human development. It had been created with a purpose, and that purpose was now becoming frighteningly clear. The game had been designed to mold young minds into capable strategists, to train future commanders without them even realizing it. It was the perfect camouflage for a covert initiative, one that would give humanity an edge in warfare, if they could unlock the full potential of what they had already begun. As they dug deeper, it became increasingly evident that the game wasn't isolated. There were other instances, other children, who had also displayed uncanny strategic brilliance after playing the same simulation. The game was, in essence, a global training tool, one that had quietly been shaping the next generation of military minds. Dr. Parker's heart raced as the implications of their findings sank in. Humanity had unknowingly created an intelligence-based weapon. And now, as the Zerk's fleet loomed above them, the time had come to activate the next phase of the plan. The military leaders, aided by Dr. Parker and her team, began making preparations. They had no choice but to harness the very thing they had created, to turn the intelligence of the game into their greatest weapon. Back on the Zerk flagship, Vrothak's unease grew. The more his fleet observed Earth's movements, the more certain he became that something was amiss. Humanity was too quiet, too unreactive. The Zerk had expected resistance, but it seemed as though Earth's governments had yet to organize a coherent defense. The child's actions were troubling, but they still felt isolated. What he didn't know was that while his fleet watched Timothy Adams, Earth's hidden alliance was already preparing to confront the Zerk in a way they had never expected. The Zerk were convinced that the key to winning was sheer strength, the power of their technology, and their military might. They hadn't accounted for humanity's greatest weapon, its creativity, its adaptability. They hadn't realized that Earth wasn't just relying on brute force or technology. They were evolving in ways the Zerk hadn't anticipated, learning, adapting, and turning the very game that had intrigued the alien Admiral into a weapon of war. The real battle for Earth wasn't going to be fought with starships and lasers. It was going to be fought with the human mind, with the very intelligence the Zerk had underestimated. And as the Zerk fleet prepared for invasion, they were already a step behind. Earth's response was coming, sooner than they could have imagined. As the Zerk fleet continued to hover ominously at the edge of Earth's atmosphere, Vrothak watched the planet with increasing skepticism. It was the calm before the storm, but there was something about the silence that made him uneasy. The humans had yet to show any form of organized resistance, and Vrothak found it hard to believe they would just sit idly by as an alien armada descended on their world. His thoughts were interrupted by a sudden alert from his communications officer. "Admiral, we are receiving a transmission from Earth," the officer said, his voice tight with tension. "It's an encrypted message, but the source is unknown." Vrothak's eyes narrowed. "Patch it through." The screen flickered to life, revealing a grainy image of a human official. The figure was wearing a military uniform, but there was an odd air of urgency in the transmission. The human spoke, his voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. "This is General Daniel Hayes of the United Earth Defense Coalition. To the Zerk fleet, we know you're watching. We know you're waiting. But we will not stand by while you invade our world. The game you've been observing, the child you've been watching, it's just the beginning." The message cut out abruptly, and Vrothak stared at the screen in stunned silence. For a moment, the room was still, the hum of the Zerk command center filling the silence. A strange feeling of dread settled over him. General Hayes's words were more than just a threat. They were a declaration of intent. Zara, standing beside Vrothak, looked equally confused. What does he mean? The game. How could they know we've been watching? Vrothak clenched his fists, realization hitting him like a blast. They know about Timothy. They must have realized we were analyzing his movements. But how did they discover our presence so quickly? Before Xara could respond, another transmission came through. This time, the image was clearer, and the voice that spoke was different, calm, but with an unmistakable sense of command. "We have spent years preparing for this moment," the voice said. "Our people have been trained through unconventional means. The simulations you've been watching, those aren't just games. They're the future of warfare. What you've seen is only the beginning of what humanity is capable of." Vrothak felt his stomach tighten as the implications of the message stank in. The humans weren't just scrambling to organize a defense. They had been preparing for an invasion from the very beginning. What had appeared to be random, isolated events, a child playing a game, an odd sense of military readiness, was, in fact, part of a larger, more coordinated strategy. How could they have known? Sora muttered, her voice full of disbelief. Vrothak's eyes flashed with anger and frustration. They'd been planning this from the start. Every child playing that simulation. It's not just a game. It's a recruitment tool, a method of building a new generation of tacticians. What we saw in Timothy is just one example of the hundreds, thousands of others who've been trained in secret. The transmission continued as General Hayes outlined the human response to the invasion. The message was clear. Humanity wasn't relying on their technology or military force alone. Instead, they were relying on something far more dangerous, their minds. The game, which Vrothak had thought was just a harmless tool for entertainment, had been transformed into a covert operation to enhance humanity's strategic intelligence. "This is not what we expected," Sara said softly. "The humans have learned how to turn the very thing we underestimated into their greatest weapon." Vrothak's mind was racing. The Zerk had been the dominant force in the galaxy for millennia. They had conquered planets, defeated entire civilizations with their technology and superior tactics. But now, for the first time, they were facing an enemy who had outsmarted them. The game had allowed humans to learn at an astonishing rate, developing tactical brilliance and creativity far beyond what the Zerk had ever imagined. It was the kind of intelligence that couldn't be measured by technology alone. The humans had adapted, evolved in a way that no other species had. Vrothak's face hardened. He could no longer underestimate Earth. The human response was swift, calculated, and most importantly, they were already mobilizing their forces that had been shaped by the very same system they had thought was harmless. The Zerk had made a grave mistake in thinking humanity was a primitive species, incapable of defending itself. Now, they were facing a human alliance that had anticipated every move. "Admiral," Sarah said, her voice heavy with realization, "what if their minds are more advanced than ours? What if we've misjudged them entirely?" Vrothak stood still, the weight of her words sinking in. "We've been playing their game all along, and now they're ready to play ours." The Zerk had underestimated humanity's ability to adapt and think creatively, and now they were about to face a counterattack, not with weapons or ships, but with the power of human ingenuity. The Zerk were about to learn that the true strength of Earth lay not in its technology, but in its people's ability to evolve, to think, and to outsmart their enemies. The first wave of Earth's response was coming, and the Zerk were not ready for it. The Zerk fleet stood poised in orbit, ready to descend on Earth with overwhelming force. Their ships were massive, their weapons primed, their technology superior in every measurable way. And yet, as Vrothak stared at the screens, his mind churned with doubt. The message from General Hayes had shaken him more than he cared to admit. The humans had been preparing for this. They had known the invasion was coming, and now, it seemed, they were ready to fight back. Vrothak paced in the command center, his eyes darting over the data being fed to him. The human response had been swift and coordinated, their military forces seemingly mobilizing with efficiency that shouldn't have been possible for such a young species. There was no sign of panic, no signs of chaos, just a calm, deliberate preparation that sent chills down his spine. "They're not reacting like we expected," Sarah said, her voice laced with confusion and concern. "They're not fleeing. They're not hiding. They're organizing." "Exactly," Vrothak replied, his voice tight. "They're not scared. They're ready for this. And it's all because of that game. Their young are learning faster than we could have ever imagined. We didn't realize how deeply integrated it was into their society." As the Zerk continued to observe Earth's military buildup, their sensors detected something unexpected. Human ships, small but efficient, had begun launching from the planet's surface. These weren't massive battleships like the Zerk had prepared for. No, these were sleek, fast vessels, designed for hit-and-run tactics, using guerrilla-style warfare that the Zerk had never